Economist, Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Director of Research, no less. And so I often get the question, how did you get connected with early childhood development? Can't quite figure this out, banking and kids. So I'm going to reminisce a little bit with you about how I got started. It was two mistakes or two miscalculations that got me involved. There was a group of us, this goes back about 9 years ago, that would get together about once a month, and we would invite a CEO, a policymaker, an academic, a philosopher, just sit down over lunch and talk about their passion. Well, about 9 years ago, we invited the executive director of an organization called Ready for K, Ready for Kindergarten. And this person made a very impassioned plea for early childhood education and development. I didn't like it. It was basically making a moral argument. And I agreed with the moral argument, but I raised my hand and I said, this was Todd Otis, I said, Todd, I don't think a moral argument is going to get you very far, because you can make moral arguments about investing more in K through 12. You can make moral arguments for investing more in higher education, in reducing crime, reducing pollution, etc. Policymakers need something more substantive, something where they can evaluate, where they can rank the various proposals out there to improve society. Well, that was my first mistake. That organization was established with the help of Al Quie, former governor of Minnesota, and Don Frazier, former mayor of Minneapolis. And Don and Al start calling me up and say, okay, we agree with you. We want you to come on the board and work on this paper, write this paper for us. Fine. Not easy to say no to these guys. I tried to explain to them, though, my expertise was pre-Civil War banking. I really knew very little about early childhood education, didn't pretend to. So I went back to the bank, and I had a young colleague there by the name of Rob Grumwald, and I said, Rob, I've committed us to doing this work. But I said, don't worry about it, because my guess is we can go to the literature, and it's going to be pretty obvious. And we can write this report, give it to Ready for K, and we'll be done. And that's what we did. It took about 3 or 4 months, handed it to them. And this was my second miscalculation. I thought we could hand it to Ready for K and I could go back to my old Civil War, pre-Civil War records and work on my banking studies. Well, it turned out, after we wrote that report, Ready for K sent it out around the country, in fact, around the world, and Rob and I have been to virtually every state and many countries around the world over the past 8-9 years. Okay, so what did we say? What did we say that got all this attention? We basically came to the conclusion that early childhood development is our best investment. More specifically, we said we wanted people to think of early childhood development as economic development. And when you focus on at-risk children, it's economic development with a very, very high public return. That's the takeaway, if you will. That's the bottom line that got all this attention. So what I want to do is take you through the research that we looked at. Actually, I'm going to first talk about the wrong way to do economic development. I'm going to talk about something we dubbed many years ago the economic bidding war. Then I'm going to go to the right way to do economic development, and not surprising, I'm going to talk about education, and I'm going to try to make the case that we're way underinvesting in early childhood education. That was kind of the bottom line of our work, but I'm not going to leave you there. It's one thing to say we can see it in the research, we can see it in a lab, if you will, in rarefied environments, but there's a real challenge. Can you bring it to the real world? Can you bring it to scale? So I'm going to conclude this talk with a proposal that's actually been put in practice on bringing it to scale and doing it right. Okay. So the wrong way to do economic development. You're probably familiar with this. I'm going to give you a hometown example. We're going back, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I'm not exactly sure, but there was a company in Minneapolis known as Lawson Software. Lawson Software consisted of 500 employees, well-paying jobs. They were looking to expand. They were looking to double their size. And they were going to do that in Minneapolis. But they happened to sit down one morning with the mayor of St. Paul. And the mayor of St. Paul, who's trying to reinvigorate the downtown, said to the owners of Lawson Software, if you come to St. Paul at public expense, $110 million, we'll put up an office tower for you. You're the owners of Lawson. That's pretty hard not to do. From St. Paul's point of view, you get a brand new building. You get 500 employees, plus the potential for another 500. And they accepted it, and they took it, and there you have Lawson Software. It is in downtown St. Paul. It sure looks like economic development. If you're in downtown St. Paul, you saw, again, 500 employees. Over time, another 500. They spend money around town. It's what economists call the multiplier effect. So that adds to more jobs and more activity. You can see why St. Paul was very excited getting this company. But imagine if you're the mayor of Minneapolis. You just lost 500 jobs, plus the potential for 500 more. You know that positive multiplier that we talk about in St. Paul? That's a negative multiplier in Minneapolis. It's what economists call a zero-sum game. So $110 million of public money was spent. And if you're a citizen of this state of Minnesota, not one new job was created. It was simply moved from one city to another. We dubbed this the economic bidding war. Of course, it doesn't just go on between cities. It goes on among states. And from a national perspective, billions of dollars are going to private companies in the name of creating jobs, not one new job from a national perspective. We move them around. We argued it violated our Constitution because our Constitution says cities and states are not supposed to be interfering with interstate commerce. We argue it's bad economic policy. It is the wrong way to do economic development. It is a zero public return. I think we can beat that. So when Rob and I wrote that part of the essay, and in fact, when I was going around the country speaking on this particular issue, people would ask me, okay, Rolnick, if that's the wrong way to do economic development, what should we do? Well, my knee-jerk reaction, this is before I looked at the literature on early childhood development, my knee-jerk reaction would be invest in people, invest in human capital. Why would I have said that? Post-World War II, in virtually every economic miracle around the world, including Japan, Ireland, Korea, China, and India today, a critical factor in their success is the quality of their workforce and how well they educated their kids. You should know that here in Minnesota. We have one of the most highly educated workforces in the country, and we have one of the most successful economies in the country. So, before Rob and I looked at this literature, my knee-jerk reaction was invest in human capital. Invest in K through 12. That's what I thought education was about, and higher education. But then we started to look at this literature on early ed. And let me point out, I'm going to talk about one longitudinal study. There are 4 of these longitudinal studies that have been done on early ed, all coming to roughly the same conclusion. But the famous one is known as the Perry Preschool study. It began in the early 60s. Brilliant idea. What they did is they took 123 at-risk families, randomly divided them into 2 groups. One group gets a very high-quality early ed program. What I mean by high quality? Master-level teachers, small classroom size, home visits, working with the parent, engaging the parent. Then they have the control group that doesn't get this program, and they follow these kids for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Actually, the 10-year study was kind of disappointing. The IQ goes up, and by the 3rd grade, the IQ comes down. So relative to the control group, the program group didn't look like it was doing much better after 10 years. Many thought Perry Preschool was a failure. Interesting. Rob and I first looked at the 30-year data that was available at the time, and when we looked at outcomes, there was quite a bit of difference. Those that were in the program were less likely to need special ed, were less likely to be retained in the first grade were more likely to be literate by the sixth grade, graduate high school, get a job, start a family, stay off welfare, and the crime rate between the two groups of children, the control group and the program group, goes down 50%. Now, economists can put dollar values on anything, okay? And we ask a simple question. We said, what was the return on that investment? So we kind of put some numbers together. In terms of the program cost, it was roughly, in today's dollars, roughly $10,000 a year or $20,000. It was a 2-year program. These were 3- and 4-year-olds. So that's your investment, okay? That's how much money publicly, you could say, we put up, $20,000. So what were the benefits? And I've already mentioned many of these benefits, but in particular, you can see there's an incredible savings when it comes to crime and reducing crime. So we asked the question, what was the return on that investment? What was the annual rate of return? Now, under certain conditions, you can take these kind of numbers and back out annually what the return was, inflation adjusted. We told ourselves, we're pretty sure we could beat 0, but probably a more realistic benchmark would be the stock market. Stock market post-World War II, inflation adjusted, annual return about 5.8%. So we were thinking, Perry looked like it was a pretty successful program. It probably can beat 5.8%. We were looking for maybe 7, 8. So here it is. U.S. stock market, 5.8%. The total return was 18%. Most of that was a public return. That's an annual rate of return. 18% total. Most of it was public. Benefiting society because the cost of schooling goes way down. The cost of crime goes way down. So it's pretty clear from our point of view, as a public, as a society, we way underinvested, especially for at-risk children. We've way underinvested in early childhood education. We argued these were actually conservative numbers. Conservative because we didn't have, we're just starting to get data on children of the children. We didn't have data on the siblings in the family. Odds are if the programmed kids working with their parents were doing better, odds are the siblings were doing better. We didn't have data on that. We didn't have data on productivity of the parents. Odds are if kids are starting school engaged, healthy, and ready to learn, teachers are more productive. So we actually think this is a conservative estimate. As I mentioned, Rob and I have been going around the country giving this particular part of the paper, and I was in Boston giving this paper, and a fellow brings me aside and invites me up to Brandeis to talk to me and says, Art, I really like what you're doing. I like this idea of focusing on the 3- and 4-year-olds and the Perry Preschool study. And he recognized there were other studies that also showed high returns. But he said, for the most at-risk kids, 3 and 4 is too late. I didn't know what he meant by too late. By the way, this person is Dr. Jack Shunkoff, who was co-author of a book, Neurons to Neighborhoods. And in his book, they had documented the recent work that neuroscientists have done in brain development in the early years. I want to show you what their finding is. This is an extreme case. This is actually Dr. Bruce Perry's work, working with the Romanian orphans. If you recall, those children were put in cribs and maybe they got fed 2 or 3 times a day, and that was it for adult interaction. Extreme neglect. And what Dr. Perry shows is that the brain is about 1/3 the size of what it should be, of what a normal brain is. What Jack Shunkoff would say is the debate between nature and nurture is over. We know that adult interaction in those early years are critical. The positive adult interaction is critical for how that physical brain develops. So Jack challenged me. He said, Art, if you and Rob, and we were in the process of writing a second essay on how to bring this research to the public policy arena, he challenged us. He says, whatever policy you come up with, you better start early. So actually, there's quite a few challenges here in bringing this research to the real world, if you will. Rob and I started thinking about, okay, our best investment. We've got this research that says focusing on at-risk kids, providing high-quality early ed is an extraordinary return. It's so extraordinary that I know my venture capitalist buddies wouldn't let this investment go unfunded for very long. It's a type of return the private sector would grab right away. But there are lots of challenges here. How do you actually make this work? One thing, it's clear, whatever system you design, it better be focused on the most vulnerable, the most at-risk kids. We call those our high-return kids now. Okay, so that's the first thing. Whatever system you have, it better focus on at-risk. You better have quality. You can't just have this with just childcare. You have to have development people. You have to have specialists. You have people with expertise in knowing how that brain develops and how to work with that child. So you got to invest in quality. As Jack Shunkoff would say, and as the brain development research says, you better start early. And early, when we talk about early childhood, we mean prenatal to 5. We mean early. Power parents. I don't think you can get sustainable results out of any program if you haven't engaged the parent. So you got to figure out a way, again, whatever program you put on the table, you better figure out a way to empower the parents. Finally, you better be able to bring it to scale. It's not going to be good enough if you can do this for 30% of the at-risk kids. I'm not going to make the moral argument. I'm going to make the economic argument. These are all high-return kids. Any business would invest in this project to the fullest. So you better be able to bring it to scale. You can't just show me, you can show me great programs. I know there's great programs all around the country, but if they're not scalable, I don't want to talk to you. It's got to be scalable. Okay, so what system do we have in mind? Now remember, you're talking to 2 economists here. We're trained to think about markets and how powerful markets are. And when you empower the customer, markets tend to work very well. So that was our idea, a very simple idea. How do we empower the parents? Scholarships. Scholarships, not for 18-year-olds to go to college, but for 3- and 4-year-olds to go to a high-quality program. And the parent makes the decision in which program. Maybe it's a Head Start, maybe it's a Montessori, maybe it's a New Horizon, maybe it's a KinderCare, but the parent makes that judgment. Now you're going to say to me, well, wait a minute, what happened to the early years? So our program is really scholarship. Our proposal is scholarship/mentor. We have research to show that home visiting nurses, starting prenatal, can make a huge difference in the health of the child in terms of reducing infant mortality, reducing the number of low birth weight babies, and getting the parent, usually it's a single mom, interacting positively with that kid. So that's the simple idea. Parent mentors, scholarships, engage them early. I'm very proud to say here in Minnesota, the state created an organization called the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation. It is made up of your top CEOs in the state, including the CEO of Cargill, the CEO of Best Buy, the CEO of Ecolab, the CEO of the Taylor Corporation. Mike Cerisi is on this board. Bob Brunick's the president of the university, is on this board. Charlie Weaver, who's the executive director of Business Partnership, they represent 100 companies, is on this board. Raised $20 million, 2 flagship programs. One called Parent Aware. It's a rating system. To get a scholarship kid, you have to have a 3 or a 4-star rated program. And then we have circled the neighborhood in St. Paul. Many of you probably know Frogtown, and a little bit north of Frogtown. If you live in that neighborhood, and if your income is 185% of poverty or below, you're eligible, and that's it. That's eligibility. We've given out close to 625. We've got about 625 families now engaged in this program. And once you get the scholarship, it's yours. If you live in Frogtown, but you happen to work in the western suburbs, that's fine. That scholarship goes with you. Parent decides. Parent may start one program, not so great, go to another program. And the mentors work with the parents. Easy to scale up, empower the parents, high quality, focus on at-risk. We've got it all in there. I'm going to conclude with one of our parents. We've done a number of focus groups. We still haven't gotten, the program is still in an early stage, and we haven't gotten the final results showing how well our kids do, although we have some very strong evidence that our kids are going to do very well. But I'm just going to conclude with one story. This was one of our scholarship recipients. She fought in the Iraq War. She came back, single mom, 2 children, couldn't get a job. Kids were not doing well. She gets one of these scholarships. She was able to send her kid to a high-quality program in the western suburbs. She went back to school, and she now has a job. She couldn't tell us how grateful. She couldn't express how much this meant to her, how much it had changed her life. We didn't include that in our calculations either. So let me just finish by saying, if as a society we really mean that we're going to leave no child left behind, this program should be fully funded. Thank you.